I've always loved the quiet. That was why I left the city 5 years ago and moved into a little cabin tucked deep in rural upstate New York. Out here, the chaos of car horns, sirens, and endless chatter was replaced by the soft rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, and the occasional call of a distant bird. The cabin was more than just shelter, it was freedom. A wide deck stretched across the back, overlooking acres of trees and a lake that shimmered silver under the moonlight. I often sat out there with a cold beer in hand, watching the sun sink behind the forest, painting the horizon in streaks of crimson. The nearest neighbor was miles away. Peace was my only companion, and for years, I thought I preferred it that way. But peace doesn't last forever. 2 weeks ago, the silence began to change. The first night, it was just the snap of a twig in the distance. Harmless, I told myself, deer, raccoon, maybe even a fox. The woods are alive, after all. But the sounds didn't fade. They multiplied. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, branches shifting. No pattern. No consistency. Just enough to remind me, each night, that something was moving out there. Then came the scratching. Subtle at first, like tiny claws dragging across the side of the cabin. But the sound was deliberate, slow, like it wanted to be noticed. It came from the spare bedroom window, the one that looked out toward the darkest part of the woods. I tried to dismiss it. Told myself it was a squirrel or maybe the wind carrying the branch of a tree too close. But the unease settled in my chest like a weight. That night, I locked every door, every window, and sat awake longer than usual, listening to a silence that no longer felt like peace, but a threat. The next night, it returned. The scratching wasn't distant anymore. It was right outside the spare bedroom window. I crept through the hallway, each floorboard groaning under my feet. Pulling the curtain aside, I expected a raccoon staring back at me. But the yard lay empty, bathed in silver moonlight, shadows stretching long and hollow. I forced myself to believe it was just my imagination. But then, tapping. Gentle. Intentional. As if knuckles brushed against the glass. My skin prickled. My pulse pounded. I armed myself with a flashlight and, later, a crowbar from the shed. The spare room hadn't been touched in months, its air stale and heavy. The walls seemed to hold their breath as I stepped inside. I checked under the bed, behind the dresser, nothing. But when I turned toward the closet, my heart sank. The door was ajar. I didn't remember leaving it that way. My hand trembled as I pulled it open. Empty, except for a scrap of cloth wedged into the back corner. Torn, dark, like it had once belonged to a shirt. My throat tightened. Someone had been here. That night, I slept on the couch with a baseball bat resting across my lap. The house was silent, unnervingly so. No scratching, no tapping, only my heart refusing to slow. But silence can be worse than noise. The following evening, determined not to run, I stayed in bed. The quiet pressed against the walls until, at last, it came again, the tapping. Louder this time. Deliberate. I stormed toward the spare bedroom, flashlight shaking in my grip. And there, beyond the curtain, was no empty yard. A shadow stood outside. Human. Still. Watching. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. I could make out the faint rise of shoulders, the blur of a face hidden in darkness. My knees weakened, terror rooting me in place. I stumbled backward, grabbing the phone, fingers barely able to press 911. My voice cracked as I told the operator, someone's outside my house. They're watching me. I hung up and spun around. The hallway groaned. A slow creak. Footsteps. Inside the cabin. I didn't think. I ran. Through the back door, into the woods, branches whipping my face as I sprinted blindly toward the faint glow of approaching sirens. The flashing lights painted the treetops as I collapsed behind a pine, chest heaving. Officers stormed the cabin, weapons drawn, but I couldn't bring myself to follow them back inside. Minutes dragged. I waited, hidden among the trees, until the woods swallowed the sirens again. Later, I told the police I was safe. But the cabin. I never returned. To this day, it stands empty on the edge of the lake. A perfect little escape turned into a nightmare. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear it, the gentle tap at the window, the slow drag of cloth against wood, the whisper of someone waiting. Was it a stranger passing through? A drifter? Or had they been there all along, living in the shadows of my home while I slept only feet away? I'll never know. What I do know is this: the woods no longer sound peaceful. And every time the wind rattles a branch against the glass, I wonder if somewhere out there, they're still waiting for me. When I was 22, I rented the downstairs apartment of my parents' house. It was a simple arrangement, cheap rent, some privacy, and enough space to call my own. The basement apartment had its own entrance, a little kitchen that opened into the living room, and a narrow hallway leading to my bedroom, bathroom, and laundry room. A locked stairwell door separated it from the main house. My parents often traveled, and those weekends gave me the freedom I craved. On one particular Friday, they were away, so I invited my friends Anthony and Jay over. We blasted music, cracked open beers, and watched the hockey game on my couch. By the time the final buzzer rang, the air was heavy with laughter, the faint smell of alcohol, and the comfort of old friendships. The couch downstairs was huge, perfect for crashing after a long night. I headed to my bedroom while my friends passed out in the living room. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke to faint creaking above me. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was pacing upstairs. Half asleep, I brushed it off, assuming one of my friends had gone upstairs for water. But then my bedroom doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to open it. My heart jumped, though I stayed silent, convincing myself it was just one of the guys stumbling to the wrong room. The lock held, and after a few moments, the knob stilled. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back to sleep. The next morning, Anthony was already gone, and Jay swore he didn't remember touching my door. I let it slide. But that uneasy thought lingered: someone had tried to come in. That night, after a long day out, I collapsed into bed. The house was still, the silence pressing. Then I heard it again, the creak of footsteps directly above me, in the kitchen upstairs. This time, I couldn't shake the tension coiling in my chest. My gut screamed something was wrong. The footsteps stopped, but before I could calm myself, the doorknob to my bedroom twisted again. This time, it was followed by a soft knock. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare speak. My phone sat beside me, glowing faintly. With trembling hands, I texted my parents and friends, praying one of them would reply that it was just a prank. Silence. My parents weren't due back until Monday. Gripping a heavy object from my dresser, I crouched in the corner, barely breathing. 10 minutes dragged by in suffocating silence. Then, with my chest tight, I whispered into the phone and called 911. I begged the operator to send help, whispering every word as quietly as possible. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, headlights cut across my window. A soft tap on the glass made me flinch. A uniformed officer stood outside. Relief washed over me. I handed him my spare key, and soon the sound of footsteps echoed again, but this time it was the police entering my apartment. They swept the basement quickly. Empty. Then we crept upstairs together, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The kitchen. The hall. Nothing. My nerves buzzed like static. Then, in my parents' bedroom, the silence shattered. Shouts. Movement. From the hallway, I saw 2 officers yanking someone from beneath my parents' bed. My stomach lurched. A man, dirty, wild-eyed, wearing a torn sweatshirt and shorts, was dragged into the light. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with hatred. He looked like a vagrant, maybe insane. But the way he stared at me, it was pure malice. The police restrained him and marched him out. My knees felt weak, my whole body trembling. Once the stranger was gone, the officers told me he might have slipped inside while we were blasting music the first night, or worse, he had been hiding in the house long before. I hardly slept that night. When the morning sun finally broke through the blinds, I called my parents, my voice still shaking. They were horrified, but since the man was homeless and hadn't stolen anything, they chose not to press charges. But I'll never forget the look in his eyes as he was dragged away. It wasn't just anger. It was as though he wanted me to know that he had been there, watching, waiting. Even now, whenever I hear the old house creak, I wonder, was that the last time he came inside, or just the last time we caught him? I was 15 when this happened, back in 2010. My parents were heading to the casino for the night, leaving the house to me and Abby, our loyal black lab. It was around 11, and like most teenagers back then, I was glued to my computer. Instant messenger pings, YouTube videos playing in the background, the glow of the monitor was the only light in the room. Then Abby barked. Her sharp growl echoed from the living room. At first, I thought my parents had returned earlier than expected. But the door never opened. Minutes passed, and her barking only grew louder, more insistent. I pushed myself up from the desk, nerves buzzing, and stepped into the living room. She was fixed on the front windows, her body tense, her teeth bared. The driveway beyond was dark, empty, save for one car, ours. No headlights. No engine. My parents weren't home. I told myself it was nothing. A passing car, maybe, or a neighbor's door slamming shut. But as I sat back down, the unease only deepened. Abby barked again, stopping and starting like something, or someone, was circling the house. 5 minutes later, I heard it. A faint rustle at the living room door. Then, a knock. I froze. Gathering my courage, I crept back toward the windows. Nothing. The yard was empty. The night was thick and still. I locked the door, my hand trembling on the knob. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, until another knock echoed from the side of the house. This time, Abby went wild, claws skidding on the floor as she ran from room to room. I stood in the center of the house, every direction feeling exposed. My skin prickled as a new sound rose, metal rattling. Someone was testing the basement door. That door was hidden beneath the deck, far behind the house. To find it, you had to know it existed. My heart pounded. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They were determined. Abby's bark turned to a growl I'd never heard before. I'd always known her as a gentle dog, a sweetheart. But tonight she sounded like a predator ready to fight. And then, the noises stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. For a moment, the silence smothered everything. I didn't even breathe. Abby growled low, her ears forward, staring at the basement door. Then, like lightning, she bolted down the stairs, nails scraping wood as she vanished into the dark. Her snarls echoed below. It didn't sound like my sweet dog anymore, it sounded primal, dangerous. Something had triggered that instinct, something real. Minutes dragged like hours. I couldn't move. I waited for her barking to continue, for the growl to rise again, but it didn't. The silence downstairs was unbearable. My chest tightened as fear and adrenaline crashed together. Finally, instinct kicked in. I shouted for her, voice cracking, and when she came racing back up the stairs, relief almost buckled my knees. I slammed the interior basement door shut and locked it tight. But my terror wasn't over. Grabbing the house phone, because I didn't even have a cell back then, I ran with Abby into my parents' bedroom. My hands fumbled through the closet until I found the small gun my dad kept stored there. I wasn't brave, not really, but I felt I had no choice. My fingers shook near the trigger as I crouched in the dark closet, ready to call 911. That's when the front door opened. The sound of the knob twisting and the hinges groaning nearly stopped my heart. Abby leapt out of the closet before I could stop her, barking wildly. I screamed after her, but then, voices. Familiar voices. My parents. They stood in the doorway, confused, petting Abby as if nothing had happened. My words tumbled out in gasps as I told them everything, the knocks, the rattling doorknob, the basement door. My mother's face paled. My father's jaw set like stone. He searched the entire house that night with his gun in hand, every room, every shadow. But he found nothing. I didn't sleep at all. The next afternoon, the knock came again. This time in daylight. My stomach flipped. I darted into another room while my dad opened the door. And there he was. Uncle Pete. Standing there with a strange smile and an envelope in hand. Pete had always unsettled me. He was the kind of man who leaned too close, who lingered too long. Not illegal, not obvious, but wrong. Everyone in the family felt it. The way he treated his wife, the way he stared at kids, it was something you avoided, even if you couldn't explain why. Now he stood on our doorstep, claiming he had tried to drop off a card last night. My father's face hardened. He slammed the door after only a few tense words. When I opened the envelope, my stomach turned. A thank you card, with a gift card inside, thanking me for helping his daughter, my cousin, with softball. All that terror. All that panic. Because of him. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was never about the card. The card sat heavy in my hand, more disturbing than comforting. My dad's voice was cold when he told me, Pete admitted he'd been the one outside last night. The footsteps. The rattling. The attempt at the basement door. My skin crawled. Pete had always been a creep, but now he was something worse. Dangerous. My dad threatened him then and there, making it clear he wasn't welcome near us again. After that, family gatherings became strained, and eventually, we stopped seeing him at all. But that night never left me. I think about the way Abby growled at the basement door, the way the noises stopped as if someone had slipped inside. I think about what might have happened if Abby hadn't been there, if she hadn't scared him off. What would he have done if he had gotten inside? Even now, over a decade later, I can still hear it, the knocking, the scraping, the rattle of a doorknob in the dark. It wasn't burglars. It wasn't strangers. It was someone I knew. And somehow, that's far more terrifying.